All right, everyone. I had to leave today so that I'm presenting a presentation to a club here in town, and so this is the only way I can think of for you to not get behind. So what we're going to work on today is we're going to continue doing our rhetorical analysis. So if you have not done so already, you need to get to Google Classroom and open your rhetorical analysis that we worked on yesterday. The big difference today is I've removed your editing privileges. Since I'm working on this alone via video, you're not going to be able to interact with it anymore. You're just going to be able to see the things that I've put in there throughout the course of this lecture. Okay, so you still need to be paying attention as we go through this, because remember, you're going to have to conduct your own rhetorical analysis, so it's really important that you know the steps in getting this completed. Okay, we left off yesterday. We'll be starting here where it says, and because they kept marching. So remember, in a rhetorical analysis, different than a literary analysis, we're going to be looking at the author's use of rhetorical devices and strategies, as well as their use of figurative language. So with that, it completely differs from literary analysis, which is like the first half of your My Story, where we're looking at simile, metaphor, those literary elements and how those enhance the piece and how those tie it all together. Instead, we're going to look at the rhetorical devices, their persuasiveness, while also looking at figurative language and how that impacts either the speaker or the writer's message. Okay, so with us being persuasive, we're really looking at how is the author framing their argument. Okay, so we're going to start here. And because they kept marching, America changed. Because they marched, a civil rights law was passed. Because they marched, a voting rights law was passed. Because they marched, doors of opportunity and education swung open so their daughters and sons could finally imagine a life for themselves beyond washing somebody else's laundry or shining somebody else's shoes. Because they marched, city councils changed, and state legislators changed, and Congress changed, and yes, eventually the White House changed. Okay, the first rhetorical device, I'm going to introduce you to a new rhetorical device today, and it's written on the board, and that is anaphora, A-N-A-P-H-O-R-A. Anaphora is the intentional use of a pronoun in which changes the expression and the way the argument is framed. So, and because they kept marching, okay, the pronoun they here is the use of anaphora. President Obama, what he's trying to do here is frame this argument around the civil rights movement, which we talked a lot about yesterday, is framing it all around that civil rights movement. And so what Obama's trying to do is he's trying to continue that discussion in civil rights and really portray how they, rather than focusing on the individual person, how they as a whole contributed to the civil rights movement. Okay, we also see him use a little bit of ethos and some pathos, arguably, okay, towards the end, where he says, because they marched, city councils changed, and states legislators changed, Congress changed, and yes, eventually the White House changed, referring to and alluding to, really, the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama. He's kind of alluding to himself there, establishing that ethos, because that's his credibility. This is the 44th President of the United States and the first African-American president. Okay, and so he's really trying to frame the civil rights and how, because they changed, Congress then changed. The genetic makeup. So rather than being predominantly white, then we have Hispanic and African American representation in our legislatures, which we hadn't had before. City council, state legislators, Congress, our federal government changed, and yes, finally the White House changed. Okay, the genetic makeup with our first African American president. Okay, so he's starting to establish ethos there, and we also see a little bit of pathos because he's trying to draw on that excitement of, hey, this is the first African American president we've ever had. Okay, and that was really in his 2008 election. Okay, that was a big deal. As soon as he was inaugurated, this is our first African American president ever elected. Okay, and while some people, we still have that tendency to pull away from that, many people embrace that as a change. We now have an African American president. Okay, so that excitement that occurred there, he's really trying to pull on that as well and kind of get them behind his message. So that is a little bit of pathos in there. We're going to keep going. So those are the victories I'm trying to skip paragraphs here. Because they marched, America became more free and more fair, not just for African Americans, but for women and Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, for Catholic, Jews, Muslim, for gays, for Americans with disabilities. America changed for you and for me, and the entire world drew strength from that example, whether the young people who watched from the other side of an iron curtain and would eventually tear down that wall, or the young people inside South Africa who would eventually end the scourge of apartheid. First thing we're starting to see here is more of that ethos and pathos. Okay, and we talked yesterday about how Obama does a really good job, and he does it very often in trying to establish ethos and pathos by making us all seem as one. And so something as simple, it's like yesterday, where he says fellow Americans. Remember, he's trying to put us side by side with him. Okay, so rather than us looking at him up, okay, like we trying to hold him up, he's saying, no, here, I'm right here with you. Okay, we're just Americans. I'm the president, yes, but I'm right here with you. And he's doing that here again by trying to humanize, when we talk about more fair society, trying to humanize African Americans, women, Latinos, Asians, that we're all in this together attitude. Okay, and so he's really trying to establish that, and that really helps with his ethos by talking about those ethnicities, religions, disabilities. He even goes as far as sexual preference. So he's trying to appeal to all aspects of society and all Americans. Okay, so that's his ethos, and depending on how some of these people feel, like in today's world where we have so much hostility towards Muslims, and we still have a little bit of hostility towards homosexuality, okay, that's a little bit of pathos, okay, trying to get these religious minorities and minorities in general with us and feel like they are with us and united, okay, rather than trying to feel apart. Okay. We also have some allusion here. He starts talking about the Iron Curtain, and when we talk about the Iron Curtain, he's referring to the Berlin Wall, okay, and communism. So with that, there's a little bit of allusion there. He doesn't explicitly say, "Hey, communism," or anything like that. But remember, that's what allusion is. He's alluding to the situation. Okay. There's also a metaphor at the end, would eventually end the scourge of apartheid. Okay, that's also a metaphor. He's comparing to what's going on to that apartheid. We're going to move on again. These are the victories they won with iron wills and hope in their hearts. That is the transformation that they wrought. With each step of their well-worn shoes, that's the debt that I and millions of Americans owe those maids, those laborers, those porters, those secretaries, folks who could have run a company maybe if they'd ever had a chance. Those white students who put themselves in harm's way even though they didn't have those Japanese Americans who were called their own internment. Those Jewish Americans who had survived the Holocaust, people who had given up and given in but kept on keeping on, knowing that weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Okay, we start to see some ethos again here, trying to build his credibility by stating that he and the rest of Americans owe those who fought for civil rights. Okay, he's saying even the white people, the Jewish, okay, everyone owes these people for their contributions to the civil rights movement. Okay, because this didn't end at civil rights. So even when we had the Civil Rights Act passed, there was a fallout and there was resistance, and we pushed through that, and that eventually led to women's rights. Okay, and so we really, no matter who you are, this all lines up with this original fight for civil rights. Okay, we also have some allusion here. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Okay, many of you have heard this. This is a quote from Psalms 30. Okay, President Obama, this a little bit of ethos, building his credibility in a divine way. Okay, so this is also a little bit of pathos. So for those people who want to hear our president quote biblically, okay, he provides that. And if you have that emotional connection, you have a little bit of pathos, appealing to that religious audience. Okay, but he's also establishing that ethos as, hey, I'm credible. Look, it establishes that religious persona. Hey, he's quoting the Bible. I should listen to this guy because he's quoting things I believe in. Okay, so he also kind of talks a little bit of ethos there. We're going to keep reading. On the battlefield of justice, men and women without rank or wealth or title or fame would liberate us or free us, all in ways that our children now take for granted. As people of all colors and creeds live together and learn together and walk together and fight alongside one another and love one another and judge one another by the content of our character in this greatest nation on earth. Okay, there's a few things that are going on here. Okay, first thing is we have a metaphor to start off this paragraph. On the battlefield of justice. Okay, on the battlefield of justice. That's a metaphor. Okay, you may also argue that this could be a little oxymoronic, battlefield and justice. Okay, but it for sure is a metaphor. We also see some repetition taking place here. Okay, and fight along one another, together, one another, love one another, judge one another by the context of our character in this greatest nation on earth. Okay, so that repetition, remember, is a rhetorical strategy. All right, just like when Martin Luther King, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. Okay, that repetition is very important to an argument because this hits home. Okay, if I say this multiple times, this is going to hit home. And that's the point of repetition. He does it several times in that paragraph. Okay, we also see an appeal to nationalism. Okay, and what nationalism is the belief that your country is greater than any other country. Okay, and we see that this is the greatest nation on earth. That's some pathos. All right, I'm appealing to that love of nation. Okay, that nationalistic spirit that is so profound in our American society. Okay, I'm appealing to that, and therefore that's a little bit of pathos, a little bit of an emotional appeal. I'm going to try to appeal to those people. So Barack Obama fought his entire presidency against a gridlocked Republican Congress. Okay, and we attribute this overwhelming sense of nationalism to the Republican Party, and so that's his way of trying to get that opposition to kind of listen to what he has to say. Hey, look, we're on the same side. I think this is the greatest nation on earth. Okay, and I think we all feel that way. We love our country naturally. Okay, but even those who overwhelmingly are very nationalistic, okay, he is appealing to that side. So whether you agree with his political views or not, he's still trying to make that appeal to you. The next paragraph says, to dismiss the magnitude of this progress, to suggest that some sometimes do, that little has changed, that dishonors the courage and the sacrifice of those who paid the price to march in those years. Medgar Evers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, Andrew Schwerner, Martin Luther King Jr., they did not die in vain. Their victory was great. Okay, we have some logos here. By referring to these historical figures that we all know very well, the ones that, remember, made it into the history book, because yesterday he tried to give a voice to those who have not made it into the history book. Okay, those forgotten voices, the nameless. Now he's giving these people a name, establishing a little bit of logos, a logical argument that's saying little has changed dishonors the murders of civil rights leaders and workers. Okay, so by saying that not much has changed despite all these efforts, okay, belittles the sacrifice that these men and women have made. Okay, and so he's trying to say they didn't die in vain. Their victory, what they achieved in their lives, and remember we're framing this around the civil rights movement. So their achievements within the civil rights unit are great. Okay, you can't belittle those, and that's the argument he's making. And that making this is a logical argument. I'm appealing to logic. These people went down in history. Okay, therefore you cannot belittle their achievements because they're historical. That's a logical argument.